Zwischenzug. A German word that means in-between move. Such moves are common but unexpected in chess. Let's try to understand with this example. The great American player, Paul Morphy, was always a tactically alert player as in this game. He played Queen h4 threatening mate in 1 instead of playing the obvious d takes e4. The game continues with Queen e2, d takes e4, bishop e3, bishop g4. Here the best move is Queen c4, so bishop takes e3, g3 pushes the queen away, Queen d8 threatening Queen d1. White has no counter moves, so he plays f takes e3, Queen d1 check, King f2 and Queen f3, King g1, and bishop h3 threatening mate in 1 on g2. White queen tries last desperate moves. So Queen takes on c6, King f8, Queen takes on a8, and King e7, and now White has no other moves to stop the checkmate. And therefore he resigns. Zugzwang. It may sound like a funny way of calling your opponents, but Zugzwang is also a German word, which basically means it is your turn to move, but unfortunately all of your moves are bad. There is no pass or skip a move in chess, so sometimes having to move can make you lose the game. Let's try to understand it with this interesting example. In this position White plays King h1, and Black have 3 logical moves but all of them are losing. King takes d4 is met with a6 and the pawn eventually queens. Bishop f4 is met with knight e6 check and it takes away your bishop. And finally King d6 is met with knight f5 check and the bishop is gone. Zugzwang is a very devious way to win the game. Usually it is beneficial to be able to make a move, but by forcing your opponent to make a move makes them lose the game. Underpromotion. Promoting a pawn to a piece other than a queen is known as an underpromotion. This term is applied to this situation because the queen is the most valuable piece after the king. But now you must be wondering, why would someone underpromote if the queen is so powerful? Let's try to understand this with an example. It's a game played between GM Hikaru Nakamura and GM Vladimir Kramnik. Nakamura found a creative way to gain a vital tempo to save the game. If he had promoted to a queen, Kramnik would take the knight and promote his pawn to a queen with check. By underpromoting with check himself, White was able to avoid the black pawn's promotion and entered a winning endgame. Stalemate. Stalemate is one of the drawing rules of chess. It happens when the player who has to move has no legal moves available. The game then ends immediately in a tie, and each player is awarded half a point. This position shows a common stalemate done by beginners. The queen, being such a potent attacker, can quickly force a win against a lonely enemy king. But it can also leave no legal moves for the opponent and cause a draw. It is a great idea to keep in mind because sometimes you can use it to prevent losing a game, or even to stop your opponent from doing so. GM Vishy Anand saves his lost endgame against Russian GM Alexei Drev using a superb stalemate trick. In this position he plays pawn g8 queen, king takes, and then a brilliant pawn sack with a7. Black has no other choice than to take the pawn and accept a draw, as White has no legal moves remaining. Swindle. Let's imagine you are playing against a 300 elo newbie and he has finally blundered his queen. You happily take it, but it wasn't a blunder after all. The game is over. It's a draw by stalemate. You were just swindled. It happens to everyone. A swindle is when a player is losing a game and makes a tricky move that does not prevent the loss against correct play, but will save the position if the opponent doesn't see the correct reply or replies. Getting swindled can turn a win into a draw or even a loss. Sometimes it can take several moves to set up a swindle. For instance, if your opponent starts pushing their pawns to get them captured or leave them without legal moves, they may be preparing a swindle based on stalemate. Stalemate tricks are not the only type of swindle. Back-ranked checkmates and perpetual check are also common. For example, in this game from US Championship in 1963-64 between GM Larry Evans and GM Samuel Reshevsky, Larry played queen takes g3 recklessly, giving White a clear opportunity to swindle him into a draw. White first gives up his queen with queen g8 check and then rook g7 check, forcing Black to take the rook to force a stalemate. Skewer. It is one of the basic tactics of chess. It consists of taking advantage of aligned pieces to gain material, or in some cases a strategic edge against the other player. To use the skewer, you attack the file or diagonal where your opponent's pieces are lined up. In a skewer, the most valuable piece is attacked first, so it must move and make way for you to take the less valuable piece behind it. Let's take an interesting example to understand it closely. In this position, everything looks locked. You cannot move your rook, as Black is ready to eat up your pawn and then it's draw. But what if I tell that there is a beautiful skewer opportunity in this position? You play your rook to h8 and allow black to take your pawn, and then you play rook h7 check, and boom! See how black cannot protect that poor rook, and the game is just gone. Smothered Mate is one of the trickiest checkmates that exists. This checkmate is delivered by the devious knight. It usually occurs when a king is mostly or completely surrounded by its own pieces. In the following example, we see an opening trap in the Caro-Kann defense. Black has just played knight to f6, but their king is completely surrounded by their own pieces. White has a scary and game-ending resource, knight to d6 checkmate. It is interesting to note that the black cannot capture the knight on d6 because their e-pawn is pinned by white's queen. Royal fork. Starting with the assumption that you guys must be knowing what a common fork is. So here we have a specific type of fork where a piece attacks the king, queen, and another piece simultaneously. This fork is considered royal because it involves the most valuable pieces on the board. Let's look at this example. The knight attacks a queen, rook, and the king at the same time. Black has no other option but to move the king and give up the queen, and it's considered common that after losing the queen, it's really difficult to save the game. Quiet move. It's one of the moves that does not directly attack or capture anything, but instead prepares a future advantage. For example, in this situation, white quietly plays queen f7 to set up a mating net with queen f4 check. Black has no good moves here, no checks, no other position-saving moves. Let's say black plays rook to c4 to save the queen f4 check, although the engine move is to play rook c5, but I don't think that will be a common response in our elo. Therefore white responds with an alternate mating pattern, plays f4 check, king h6, queen f8 check, king h5, and queen g7. White is threading checkmate in 1. Black can delay it with h6, but it's still mate in 3 with queen e5 check. Lucena. It is one of the most common rook and pawn endgames in chess. It occurs when the defending player has a king and a rook, and the other player has an extra pawn that is about to promote, and a king that occupies the promotion square, and a rook that cuts off the enemy king by at least one file. For the Lucena position to occur, the extra pawn that is almost promoting cannot be on the 1st or 8th file. If white knows how to proceed, there is no way to stop him from winning the game. But how to win? Let's understand white's problem in this position. The king is on the d8 square, making it impossible for the pawn on d7 to promote. White wishes to move the king aside so they can promote their pawn and win the game. Black, on the other hand, wants to prevent that sequence. They plan to keep checking the white king as soon as it gets out of the pawn's way. If white decides to chase the rook with the king, black can eventually capture the white pawn on d7. So white's goal is to create a barrier between the black rook and the white pawn. This barrier would allow white to crown their pawn and win the game with their extra queen. To achieve this, white should move the rook to the 4th rank. Now black's defense will not work, as in this sequence king e7, rook e2, king d6, rook d2, king e6, rook e2, king d5, rook d2, and then white creates a barrier with rook d4. Black has to take the rook in this position, and in the next move white will queen the pawn. Greek gift. A common sacrifice designed to expose the enemy king and start a devastating attack. The Greek gift happens when a player sacrifices a bishop for the h7 pawn as white or the h2 pawn as black. As you can see, white's well-posted pieces and black's lack of defensive pieces on the king side allow for this sacrifice to work. White's knight and queen are ready to come into the attack, aided by the h-pawn and sometimes even the rook on h1. Black, on the other hand, has no way of bringing their pieces to their king's aid. If black had the possibility of bringing more pieces to the king side, especially to cover the h7 square, the Greek gift wouldn't work. Thanks for watching this video. At this moment I am used to getting 5 to 6 views. That's okay, but if you are still watching this and like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe to support me.